My name's Ali, Alistair. Been coding for about 8 years now, and the change in development workflow has kind of changed a lot this past year, especially if you're kind of new to AI. So I kind of just want to spend a little bit of time talking about like the pros and cons of AI development. As much as everyone kind of makes out as if AI is like this groundbreaking thing that's going to change how development is done for the good, this past year I've came across a lot of pitfalls if you're not careful, and I think we're going to be stuck in this pattern of relying too much on AI if we're not careful. So kind of just want to go over everything I've learned over the last year while I've been using Agentic coding. So kind of want to go over Agentic development just in general. What is it? What does it look like? The tools that people might use, and like kind of the structure or like the naming for various things, like what is an agent versus what is an AI assisted coding IDE, or what is vibe coding. And I'll go into vibe coding. I just want to kind of go over what that is, where it came from, and how people are doing it. The last major step here is I want to go over mastering Cursor. So Cursor is an IDE that's powered by AI. So you can agentically code, but it's a fork of VS Code. So it's kind of like having Copilot, but they kind of ramped up the power of the tools a little bit more than the Copilot extension for VS Code. Then I want to do a live demo of kind of vibe coding / coding with agents. And then finally, once we've kind of seen how that all works together, I want to kind of go over the pros and cons of everything agentic coding. So there's a quote here from Grady Booch. Building a cognitive system is fundamentally different than building a traditional software-intensive system of the past. We don't program them, we teach them. We're moving from writing syntax to guiding the agent to do it for us. This is no different to teaching a new developer. Agentic coding has this kind of air of, it can do everything. That's not strictly true. AI and LLMs, as they currently stand, they are wide in knowledge, but they're not deep in context. So you can get it to spit out one file really well, but the minute you have to ask it to look at a massive code base, it's not strong at that at all. And in fact, it'll regularly forget what it was doing in another file before it, as you work on the next file. And that becomes a problem, especially when you're working on large projects. So agentic, what is agentic? Well, it's above and beyond autocomplete. It's from suggestion to execution, unlike standard LLM chat. Agents have agency. They execute code, and they don't just kind of generate a response to you as a client. They are more than merely a chat. The core shift is cognitive. You stop worrying about syntax and start worrying about the system design and constraints. Essentially, what you're doing is, as opposed to thinking about, well, how does this component work in this framework. You're now thinking, okay, this is what I need to achieve with said component. So when you're writing prompts, you're now thinking from the high level instead of the nitty gritty. And that can be really handy in its own right. If you're not familiar with framework, it can get you up and running in no time at all. But the problem with that is the nuance of that language you might get lost in if you're not paying attention. So what kind of tools do you get, and what are the categories? So there are editors. So the main one I've used up to this point is Cursor. There's Windsurf and Anti-Gravity. Anti-Gravity is the new Google one that uses Gemini predominantly. And then technically there's Copilot, but it's an extension to VS Code. So the difference between an editor and an agent is the editor is your IDE. So typically when you're writing code, you're using VS Code, you're using JetBrains, Visual Studio. The editors specifically, the AI editors specifically, are actually fully integrated IDEs. So you can edit the code at the same time as you're prompting the code generation. Agents would be the models that you use inside of that. So you've got Claude, GPT, Composer, Gemini. The agents are the thought engine, an LLM model with tooling API capabilities. So what does that mean? That means your model isn't just designed as a chatbot. It doesn't just work back and forth. It has other tools available to it that allow it to react and write files and do file executions and things like that above and beyond just a message to and from. Vibe coding apps are IDEs with limited editor capabilities. So it's kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum, where one is the chat back and forth, the next is the IDE where you can kind of work with it, but then vibe coding apps are, I'm just talking to the bot and it's spitting out code. Don't know really what it's doing, but it's doing something. So how many of you guys have experience with agentic coding, using Cursor, VS Code? How many of you are using it for day-to-day work? So about the same, yeah. One of the other things is a lot of these models actually store kind of your conversation and snippets of your code. And so that kind of brings up the privacy concern side to it too. I don't think a lot of companies are really taking that seriously. But there has been numerous leaks of environment variables and things like that. So if you're going to use it at work, make sure you run it past your system admin before you do that. It's better to be safe than sorry, and you should have it in your company policy somewhere about like whether you can or cannot be using it. So what is vibe coding? Well, it was coined by an AI researcher and OpenAI co-founder Andre Karpathy. I think that's how you pronounce it. Vibe coding is kind of the slang for building software where you focus on the feel and function of the programming via prompting. It lowers the barrier of entry. I'm sure you've seen on LinkedIn a lot that there's been CEOs and managers. Oh, I can spit up a whole app. Cool, can you though? Just because you can doesn't mean it's good quality. And we got to be careful with that. So one of the problems with vibe coding is it kind of raises the mastery barrier. You need to know exactly what to ask for. And if you're not technically minded, you don't understand the underlying code, sometimes you can ask for things that are actually a major problem. Or you just don't understand the code. So it's spitting out stuff and there's security holes everywhere. So you got to be real careful with it. Okay, so let's look at Cursor, because in the world of agentic coding, I kind of prefer if I'm working with it, I want to work with it. I don't want to let it take the reins entirely. So for me, Cursor has been my tool of choice, my weapon of choice. Context is king. You want to make sure that you're using your @code, @docs, @web signifier or kind of tags. You want to make sure you're using cursor rules, which I'll get into in the demonstration. And then before you start any work, you kind of want to do a planning session. If you're starting from scratch and you're not just doing minor changes, you want to kind of build up the bones of your app, you want to start with a plan. And thankfully with Cursor, you get the plan tool where it discusses with the agent before it touches any code. So if you're working on a big project that is already existing, you can kind of work with it to figure out exactly what needs to be done before you let it touch anything. You want to then run your build. So once you've written up the plan, it'll diagnose that plan and start enacting it. Always make sure you commit before and after a big change. If you don't make that commit before and after that big change, you could really screw something up that you've been working on for a while, or you could inadvertently install a whole bunch of packages and now you're going to roll them back, and it's not good. And then afterwards, always review. If you don't know what it did, you probably shouldn't have got it to do that task. One of my biggest pet peeves is using it to vibe code and not understanding what it's actually doing. Over the past year, I've already had experiences with senior developers over me pushing code and then being like, oh, it broke. Do you know why? Nope, I vibe coded it. Cool, fantastic, great. So then I've had to go in and fix it myself. You don't want your code becoming its own black box, right? You don't want to have everything that it just spat out completely foreign to you, because the next time you have to go into that code, you're going to be clueless. Okay, so let's kind of hop into a code editor now, into Cursor. How am I looking for time? I didn't actually. I might be a little over, I think.
You're
okay. Okay, so here's kind of a quick example of what agentic coding might look like. As you can see, it basically is just VS Code. Is that okay for everyone? Can everyone kind of read that okay? So first, I've kind of just mocked up some prompts that I want it to do. So I'm going to copy and paste those into the model in a moment. But the only thing in this repository so far is I just put prettier, because I want to make sure it aligns with a certain standard of syntax. And the rules. Now, there are ways that you can go online and get like basic blueprints for rules for your code base. I actually have it somewhere here. Give me a sec. Cursor rules examples. Oh, I don't have internet. Whoopsies.
That's all right. So you're saying you're defining the spec?
Yeah. So essentially, before anything runs in the model, it'll always refer back to this. Now you can set different rules, so you can have rules specifically for Python or rules specifically for JS files. But the idea is you want to kind of section off these files so it's easier for you to read. But then all of this gets added to the prompt before it runs. And that just reminds the model, hey, this is what I want to do before I write anything. So now, this is not a perfect rule. I've had times where it completely ignored the rule and I had to go and remind it, hey, go back to the rules, please, for the love of God, and stick to them. So it's not perfect, but it does help in a lot of cases. So, okay, so we got some rules here. So these are just rules that I like to live by. Screaming snake case for const values, for pastel case for classes, private variables, prefix with that. Agentic coding sometimes over comments. I've had it without getting too kind of silly about it, but I've had code it's spat out that is, for all intents and purposes, a for loop, and it trying to explain a for loop to me. So sometimes I have to remind it, hey, stop commenting kind of uselessly, just because otherwise you've got comments to clean up afterwards. And that can go on for a while. Just some basic examples. I kind of took these examples from the GitHub platform that I was working on that one time. Okay, so let's get started. Let's take this first prompt, which is to create a functional Pomodoro timer using Vue, Tailwind, CSS. It needs a 25-minute countdown, start, pause, and circular progress indicator. Okay, so that's nice and simple. What could go wrong? Okay, so we can open up a chat. Just paste that in. You'll see it will do a fairly decent job, but I tend to find sometimes it doesn't quite do what you expect it to do, and it'll have to reiterate over itself over and over and over again. So let's see what it spits out this time. I guess since I'm going through a demo and it's going to take a little while for this to spit out, has anyone got any questions? Sure.
So I'm kind of curious about the costing side of these AI policies nowadays. There's a whole bunch of organizations with different sizes. So, like in your case, are you kind of like doing this for like prototyping with your company and stuff like that? Is there like a policy set there, or is it just kind of free form?
For the company I was working with, it was a startup. They weren't overly concerned about the usage of it, so we used it for pretty much everything day-to-day. We were trying to power out code as quick as possible. But for the costing, usually it's company dependent, but if they're encouraging you to use it, they should be paying for it. Shouldn't be coming out of your pocket, especially if they're encouraging or specifically telling you you've got to use it. Yeah, okay, so as you can see, this is kind of the first step where people kind of start to make mistakes. Keep all. No, I don't want to do that, because if I just hit keep all, I don't know what it's done here. So the first thing you want to do is start going through and reviewing all of the changes. So with agentic coding, you've kind of went from being just writing the code to now you're the code reviewer, right? You're the lead. This is a junior dev, and you got to make sure it hasn't messed anything up, added packages you don't need, added unnecessary complexity. Because ultimately, if you go and commit that and there's a security issue, that's on you. That's not the AI's fault. All it knows is make code go. So, kind of the most important takeaway from AI coding is that you got to treat it like it's a junior. You can't just let it do the code and walk away. You should be reviewing every line. If you don't want to sit and review all that code, you should be writing it yourself. Every line that AI coding generates, you should be reviewing. That's why we've had so many outages this year. Once in a lifetime outages from Google and Cloudflare and Microsoft. You don't think it's by coincidence that that's all been happening this year when Microsoft's got 30% of its code being pushed to production is AI generated. The reason why I wanted to have this talk more than anything is because I've seen the pitfalls in real life, and I've seen kind of the damage it's done if not treated carefully. It's not magic. It's just pattern matching. So you still have to be very, 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 very careful with it. And no matter how much they'll try and sell you the grift that it's, oh, the next model is so much better. It's not. They all have their problems, and the context is shallow. So you still need to understand what's going on. If you don't understand, ask your seniors. If you don't ask your seniors, or you don't have a senior to fall back on, you should be coding it yourself or researching kind of what's showing up on the screen. So we're gonna nip back to the presentation now if it lets me. There we go. Okay, so pros. It'll speed you up. I went from pushing 1 or 2 features a week to 4 or 5 features or a full module a week. No boilerplate. Technically, you don't really need to touch any files from scratch. Like different frameworks and languages will have, this is kind of what a file looks like, generally speaking. It's got the CSS file, it's got the HTML file, it's got the JS file. You don't need to do that anymore. It'll handle all that for you. If you use it correctly, it's a great learning tool. I didn't really know anything about React. I spent some time messing around with it, and I actually got a pretty good idea of what React is supposed to look like, how it feels, how generally you set up a component. And it's language agnostic. You can kind of use it across any language, which is really handy, especially if you are moving to a new language. You don't really know much about it, but you want to get started quickly. It can be really handy for like, hey, I've never touched C#, but I know I want a job queue. Okay, you know the technical, you know how to do it in JavaScript. Okay, can you do that for C#? Cool, great. It will make that exponentially easier and the entry level way lower for you. However, the cons, there's the security aspect. Like there's been prompt injections that spit out people's environments and everything. There's context drift. So that's where you're kind of coding away and then it forgets what happened last prompt, or it forgets, say for instance, you're working in the CSS file, you want to use variables in this CSS file, it's totally forgot them by the time you get to the next file. There's skill atrophy, which is a big one. You can end up becoming a worse developer if you rely on it too much because you start forgetting things. right? Like you're not researching as much. You're not doing the actual work that's hammering it into your brain. That's gone. Now you're lazy. You're AI will do it for me. And then the review fatigue. One of the biggest things that I struggled with was when I first started using it, I had to read so much code. And it's one thing to read other people's code in code review, but to do it on an hourly basis for every little change that the AI makes can be kind of a headache. It's exhausting. So sometimes coding it yourself is actually kind of a break, in my opinion. So anyway, so that's kind of all I had, and I hopefully didn't take too long. But any questions?
Round of applause for Ali here.